Jim, thanks again for doing this on short notice. How did you hear about the shooting in Pennsylvania?
Uh, I was at a Milwaukee Brewers baseball game with some other delegates and staff that had come a couple of days early to help get set up for the convention here in Milwaukee. When we got word that Trump had been shot, initially we were just kind of stunned. I mean, we didn't know what to think, uh, but relieved pretty quickly. Trump's campaign pretty quickly got out a statement that he was physically well, he was okay. They took him to a nearby hospital in just in a sort of abundance of caution, but that he was fine. He wasn't seriously injured, even though clearly there was some blood. Um, Sadly, a couple of other people sounds like they were killed. The shooter apparently was killed, and it sounds like one other person who was in the audience may have been killed, although the facts there are still kind of emerging. So I want to give that some time to be confirmed. Uh, so really shock, and maybe not even shock, Chris. I think it's more like dread. I mean, some of us who are in the Republican Party, who are supporters of Trump, we've been dreading this because the rhetoric that's directed at the man is so vitriolic. You know, the people who dislike him, who oppose him, they really hate him, and their rhetoric is so angry and hateful and personal in its attacks. I mean, calling him a fascist. Uh, a very well-known television pundit said that if he were reelected president, she would be put into a prison camp. You know, using rhetoric like this, we've dreaded it because we worry that it would trigger uh, an unstable person to violence. And we may never know in this case if that's what happened, but it seems like something like that. I mean, the the the, the real analogy here is when Ronald Reagan was shot about 40 years ago. Uh, Also survived that assassination attempt, and he was shot by an unstable person who'd been pushed to violence by media. In that case, it was by movies that had pushed that individual into violence. My concern is this rhetoric where magazines portray Trump with, in military attire, goose stepping on the cover of the magazine, or done with his face to look like Adolf Hitler, or even the Seattle Times, their cartoonist who draws him as this obese, corpulent, uh, like the bad guy from the Dune movies. This kind of dehumanizing uh, rhetoric and imagery, it it can trigger an unstable person to an act of violence because the unstable person believes they're doing good. This is an evil, evil person that they're killing, they're getting rid of, they're ridding society of. And so I think when we come away from this, what we really need to tell people is dial down the rhetoric, dial down the hate and the vitriol. It's not responsible to call a politician you oppose a fascist. Donald Trump is not a fascist. He's never been a fascist or anything like that. And people in positions of influence, in positions of authority, need to be more careful about how they characterize politicians that they oppose. That's why, and you know this, Chris, I've always advocated for focusing on policy. Here in Washington, we Republicans, we focus on policy. I mean, this is why the initiatives on the ballot in November are so important to us. We try to talk about policy, not personalities. And too much of our political dialogue is about personalities. And it's not a Republican or Democrat thing. Both sides do it. I mean, but I believe we need to move away from talking about personalities and saying someone is a bad person because we disagree with them politically. And we need to focus on the policies that elected officials advocate and criticize those. Don't portray a presidential candidate, a former president of the United States of America, as a fascist or as someone who would start prison camps. That stuff just isn't true.
So there's a lot that we don't know as you and I sit here and speak in terms of who exactly was responsible, what exactly happened. There's initial reporting that somebody went on a roof outside the rally area, and at least from ABC News, the initial reporting is someone with an AR-15 firing multiple shots from 200 to 300 yards away. Again, we are very early in this discussion, very early in the investigation. Do you think this has any sort of alters the discussion at all on assault weapons if in fact this was a shooter with an AR-15?
I, you know, it's not the tool, Chris. It's not the firearm. It's the heart and the mind of the person using the firearm. That's what the problem is. We can't legislate away uh, the risks that exist in life, and we can't vilify lawful gun owners because of what criminals do. The problem is in the heart and the mind of the criminal, of the violent person. It's not in the tools they use. You make it harder for them to use a certain kind of firearm, they'll use another kind of firearm. You get rid of all firearms, they'll use knives. You get rid of knives, they'll use clubs. The problem is in the unstable, hateful mind and heart of the violent individual. So to turn this into some sort of gun control issue, I think it really misses the point. In fact, Chris, I think it should redouble people's commitment to look after their own personal safety and arm themselves in a lawful and proper way and reasonable and rational way. Uh, you know, trying to turn this into a gun control issue talking point, I think is really cynical. I think that's not where the solution lies. The solution lies in people's hearts and their minds and what we as a society and a culture will tolerate. Again, I go back to the intense hatred directed at Donald Trump. Uh, there's a cost to that. And we need to understand that cost is a deep and profound cost, not just for politicians and pundits on TV or the internet, but for all of us. We need to expect more of people who are in positions of influence and authority. And we need them to act better and higher minded than this kind of gutter politics that unfortunately the internet has encouraged. But we also see on television and occasionally in print.
Did you happen to know anybody at that rally? There's a question already about just kind of the how this rally was organized and whether
Uh,
somebody
no,
had a line of
no,
sight.
no. It was run not by the Republican Party but by the Trump campaign. They are the ones who manage most of the rallies that he does, and it was in Pennsylvania, so it was out of my normal wheelhouse. But it was a function of his presidential campaign, and there was some expectation he was going to say something about his vice president pick at that rally. Of course, that didn't happen. Um, but I think the process is going to go forward. From all the signs I've received so far from the Trump campaign and from the Republican National Committee, we're going to go forward. If there were a few events, early kind of welcome events that were scheduled for tonight that were canceled, as you might imagine, here in Milwaukee. But the convention starts Monday, and at least so far, we are going to move ahead and have a convention on Monday. I imagine that if Donald Trump comes, and he wasn't going to be here Monday anyway, but if he comes a couple of days into the convention, maybe bandaged up a bit, but well, I imagine he was going to receive a raucous hero's welcome at the convention.
Yeah, you may have just stolen my last question, which is as far as the convention's concerned, events canceled tonight, but everything appears to be on schedule for tomorrow and Monday.
Correct. And there's not a lot tomorrow. There's a welcome reception in the evening. So far, that's still on track. Um, and then the real business starts Monday morning, and through the day Monday. So I would imagine, even if they decide to do something about the tomorrow night's welcome reception, I I do not imagine they will change the real business of the convention that starts on Monday.
All right. Well, I thank you for spending a few minutes with me and working through the technical challenges there.
No worries. I mean, it's important we talk about this, Chris, and I mean it when I say it. I hope that the policy debate that comes out of this sad event is not another gun control debate, because that's not the fix. The fix is the hearts and the minds. The fix is we need to not infect people with such vitriol and such hatred and such personal, the personality politics I've always been uneasy with. And because it's not why I got into politics. I got into politics to fix problems in policy and law that I saw. And when we start turning it to personalities, I think we begin down a slope that ends up in places of this vitriol and this, my opponent is an evil person. No, your opponents usually are not evil people. They're people you disagree with on the best way to do taxes and the best way to run schools and the best way to fight crime. It doesn't make them evil. It makes them people with different philosophies about government. And so I think we need to get back to that approach, and not this Donald Trump is a fascist, Donald Trump is a dictator, this is the end of our democracy. No, it's not. It was never the end of our democracy. But I'm concerned that whoever this poor soul was who was taking shots at Trump may have gone into that thinking, he was saving democracy by doing this. And we've got to move away from that.